well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. So, this is a continuation of our previous lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. So, we are just going to continue as well as finish off. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once you've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts, grade 6, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to our chapter of reflexive and intensive pronouns. All right, so our chapter is reflexive and intensive pronouns. Our subject is English Language Arts, grade 6. And the lessons that we are going to be focusing on today is the pronoun reflexive or intensive? And like I said, this is a continuation of our previous lesson that we did, also the reflexive and intensive pronouns. So today we are going to finish off by only finishing the one lesson. It's almost like now giving a summary of what reflexive and what intensive pronouns are, right? All right, so a reflexive pronoun. So we have a reflexive pronoun, and we said a reflexive pronoun, right? It refers back to the subject of the sentence, right? Or it refers back to the clause in which they appear. That is a reflexive pronoun. And with a reflexive pronoun, they are always objects of a verb, or a reflexive pronoun is either a preposition. So once again, a reflexive pronoun, right, or reflexive pronouns, it refers back to the subject of the sentence, right? So remember, a subject, it's either a person, animal, or thing that is doing the action. So when we have a reflexive pronoun, firstly, a pronoun takes the place of a noun, right? And the subject is usually a noun or a pronoun, and it tells us either who or what is doing the action, right? That is a basically a noun. And like we say, a pronoun takes the place of a noun, right? Because pronouns are words like I, you, he, she, they, and so on, right? Those are pronouns. So now a reflexive pronoun, right? We are saying that it refers back to the subject of a sentence. It refers back to who or what is doing something, or it refers back to the clause in which they appear. appear, in which this subject appears. And with the reflexive pronoun, right? Reflexive pronouns, they are always objects of a verb, or reflexive pronouns can be prepositions, right? Objects of a verb or objects of prepositions. All right, and if we look at an example of a reflexive pronoun, right? A reflexive pronoun is, for example, did Sarah save any cookies for herself, right? And remember, we said reflexive pronouns, you have singular reflexive pronouns and we have um, plural reflexive pronouns, right? And our singular reflexive pronouns, it it is words like, firstly, our singular reflexive pronouns end in self, and our plural reflexive pronouns end in selves, right? And we are going to go deep into the lesson and we are going to still find out how, or we're going to go over that again, right? And like we say, our reflexive pronoun, it needs to refer back to the subject, which means that if we are talking about herself, like for example, the one that I just underlined now, if we are talking about herself, right, then it means that it is referring back to Sarah, it's referring back to her, it's referring back to the person, right? So if we say, did Sarah save any of the cookies for herself? Then it means that herself is referring to Sarah. So it's the same as saying, did she save any cookies for herself? Because now she takes the place of the noun, which is Sarah. And that is why we're saying that the reflexive pronoun, which is herself, it needs to refer back to the subject of the sentence, right? Which is either she or it is Sarah. All right. And also the reflexive pronoun, the reflexive pronoun herself, which we made over here, it refers back to the subject, which is Sarah. And Sarah is the object of the preposition. And the reason why it's the object of the preposition, because we have for, right? For is our preposition. And that is why that is the object of preposition. All right. And then we have an intensive pronoun, right? Or intensive pronouns. And intensive pronouns, right? It emphasizes or it intensifies. It's like putting emphasis on the noun or the pronoun that they refer to. And when it comes to the intensive pronouns, then they can refer to any noun or they can refer to any pronoun within the sentence. So they don't just have to refer to the subject, whereas a reflexive pronoun, it refers back to the subject of that sentence or the clause in which it appears. And intensive pronouns, right? intensive pronouns are used for emphasis only, and that is why we said intensive pronouns, it emphasizes or it intensifies the noun or the pronoun that they refer to, right? So that is why we're saying that the intensive pronouns are used for emphasis only, right? And they are not objects of verbs or prepositions, whereas reflexive pronouns are objects of verbs or prepositions. All right. If we look at an example, right, of an intensive pronoun, and then we can say, no one else was home, so I brought the groceries myself. So no one else was home, so I brought the groceries myself. I brought the groceries myself. So which means that it means the intensive pronoun, which is myself over here, it puts emphasis on I because it says I brought the groceries myself. So it puts emphasis on the word I. Because since nobody was there, he didn't have a choice but to do it himself. So now he's saying that I brought the groceries myself, which means that the intensive pronoun, which is myself, puts emphasis on the word I. All right. So the intensive pronoun, right, which is myself, we said it puts emphasis on the word or the pronoun I. And if we look at another sentence, it says, after waiting in line all afternoon, we were finally able to meet the queen herself. So, which means that the intensive pronoun within that sentence, right, it is herself, and herself puts emphasis on the queen. Because here it says, after waiting in line all afternoon, we were finally able to meet the queen herself. So, who is the herself? That is the queen that they're referring to. Right? So the emphasis is being put on the queen, and our intensive pronoun is herself. All right. And another sentence is that one way or a way in which we can, so one way to tell if a pronoun is either reflexive or intensive, right? Because remember that is now we are basically weighing our reflexive pronouns as well as our intensive pronouns, right? And one way in order for us to tell if a pronoun is either reflexive or intensive, right? We can then try to replace, let's say, either the reflexive pronoun or the intensive pronoun. We can try and replace it with an object pronoun, right? And we can try and replace it with an object pronoun, and the object pronoun like me, her, or even us, right? So once you replace it with the object pronouns like me, her, or us, so if you replace it, right, with the object's pronoun me, her, or us, and you still have a completed sentence, then it is a reflexive pronoun, right? But if you replace it with an object pronoun, right? And you cannot still have the same completed sentence then it is an intensive pronoun. All right, and if we look at an example, right, of replacing either our reflexive pronoun or intensive pronoun with an object pronoun, which is me, her, or us, right? If we look at that example, and now we're going to see if the sentence changes. Remember, we said if the sentence changes, it's an intensive pronoun, but if it stays the same, right, and then it means that it's a reflexive pronoun. It says, did Sarah save any cookies for herself? So did Sarah save any cookies for herself? Right? So herself, it refers back to Sarah, right? The next one says, did Sarah save any cookies for him? And him refers to someone else. It refers to someone else, right? It doesn't refer back to Sarah. So which means that you can replace the word herself with the object to pronoun him, right? And we can still have a sentence. So even though we say, did Sarah save any cookies for him, right? Him referring to someone else, but yet the sentence makes sense. Yet the sentence still stays the same, right? Or we still have a sentence, right? So which means that this tells us that it is a reflexive pronoun, or it's reflexive, or the pronoun is reflexive. But now, if we look at But now, if we look at, for example, the next sentence says, no one else was home, so I brought the groceries myself. And remember, we said myself puts emphasis on I, right? And that is an intensive pronoun. And if we are going to change or replace the word myself with an object pronoun, then we can say no one else was home, so I brought the groceries her, right? This does not make sense at all because it says no one else was home, so I brought in the groceries her. That does not it doesn't work, right? Because that sentence doesn't sound right at all, right? So, which means that that is an intensive pronoun, or we can say the pronoun is intensive, right? So, which means that if we can replace, or if we replace, for example, our pronoun with an object pronoun, right? So if we change our reflexive or intensive pronoun with an object pronoun and the sentence doesn't work or the sentence doesn't make sense, and then it's an intensive pronoun, or if we change it or we change our pronoun to an object pronoun and the sentence still stays the same, right? Then we call that a reflexive pronoun. All right. So now we're going to a+students.ca, and we're going to our chapter reflexive and intensive pronoun. And we are doing the last lesson, which is the pronoun reflexive or intensive. But let us quickly go over here. Let me just quickly once again show you what reflexive pronouns are. So these are reflexive pronouns, right? we see that reflexive pronouns are pronouns that either end in self or it end in selves. And I told you earlier on that our subjects, our singular subjects, right, ends in self, in the reflexive pronoun self, and our plural subjects, it ends in the reflexive pronouns that ends in selves, right? And if we look at these words, our singular subjects or our plural subjects needs to refer to our reflexive pronouns, or more like our reflexive pronouns needs to refer back to our subjects, right? Which means that if we talk about myself, if I talk about myself, right, then I am talking about me or I, right? Yourself, we're talking about you. Herself, we're talking about she. Himself, he. Itself, it. If we're talking about we, ourselves, you, yourselves, or they, themselves. And as you can see, we have two yous. You can refer to one person or you can refer to more than one person. All right. And we said that also when it comes to reflexive pronouns, right? A reflexive pronoun is used to refer back to the subject of the sentence. And we said that, let's say, for example, themselves refers back to they, yourselves refer back to you, herself refers back to she, right? That is how it needs to be. Reflexive pronouns refers back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears. And when the reflexive pronoun, right, refers back to the subject of the sentence or the clause in which it appears, then it should agree with the subject. It should agree with that specific subject, which means that themselves needs to agree with they, especially when it refers back to they, right? And the reflexive pronoun can only be used to refer to the subject of the sentence or clause in which it appears. To refer to someone else or to something else, we call that a personal pronoun. So if something doesn't refer back to me, so if I'm talking about, let's say, myself, then we need to refer back to I, right? But if something refers to someone else, then that is a personal pronoun. And personal pronouns are words like me, you, him, her, it, us, or them, right? Those are personal pronouns that should be used instead. And that is when it is basically being referred to someone else. All right. So now let's quickly go back. That was basically I just wanted to basically show you once again the reflexive pronouns, right before we now go back to our lesson, which is to say, is it a reflexive pronoun or an intensive pronoun, right? And remember, we said reflexive pronouns are pronouns that end either in self or it end in selves. And these reflexive pronouns that we see over here, it needs to refer back to our subjects. Myself needs to refer back to I. Yourself needs to refer back to you. Herself needs to refer back to she. Himself needs to refer back to he. Itself needs to refer back to it. The same with ourselves needs to refer back to we, yourselves to you, themselves to they. And that is reflexive pronouns. All right, let's quickly just do the test of how to use reflexive pronouns, and then we're going on to the next one. We're going to have to choose the correct reflexive pronouns, right? It says you need to complete the sentence with a pronoun that refers back to the subject in bold. So it says when she goes to outdoor events in winter, she generally wraps, do we say herself in scarves and blankets, or she generally wraps himself in scarves and blankets? Does she refer to herself or does she refer to himself? So does she refer to herself or does she refer to himself? All right. So if we look at the sentence, right, we are going to say she generally wraps herself because herself refers to she or she refers to herself. All right. All right. The next one says at the news conference yesterday, he proclaimed, do we say he proclaimed himself, option one, the greatest player in the history of basketball, or proclaimed herself the greatest player in the history of basketball? The word self, himself or herself, needs to refer back to he. So if we refer to someone as he, do we say he is himself or he is a herself? All right, and if we were to choose the reflexive pronoun that refers back to he, then we will say it is himself. All right. Now we are going to say, is the pronoun reflexive or intensive, right? And we say the reflexive pronoun refers back to the subject of the sentence or clause in which they appear, and they are always an object of verb or an object of a preposition. And we said intensive pronouns, right? It emphasizes or it intensifies the noun or pronoun they refer to, right? When it comes to intensive pronouns, they can refer to any noun or they can refer to any pronoun within the sentence, not just the subject. Remember, with the reflexive pronoun, it refers back to the subject, right? So, for example, we have herself refers back to she, himself refers back to he, myself back to I. That is reflexive pronouns. Whereas intensive pronoun, like the word intense, it emphasizes or intensifies the noun or pronoun that they refer to. And they can refer to any noun or any pronoun within the sentence, not just the subject. Intensive pronouns are used to emphasis only. It's used for emphasizing only. And they are not objects of a verb or they are not objects of a preposition, right? All right, so now let's go to our test, right? Or before we go to our test, let's do these three activities and then we're going to our test. It says, when in public, some famous actors disguise themselves so that they can slip by their fans unnoticed. All right. So we say themselves. So if you look at the word themselves, right, then it means that themselves is a reflexive pronoun because remember themselves refers back to the subject, right, which is the actors. Yes, actors, famous actors. All right, we look at the next one. We need to say, is the pronoun is this a reflexive pronoun or intensive pronoun? It says, Mr. Sherman taught me how to use the power drill, and now I drill holes myself. We need to say if this is either a reflexive pronoun or if it is an intensive pronoun. All right, so we said this is an intensive pronoun because myself refers back to I. So it says, and now I can drill holes myself. All right, so now let's go to our test, right? Where we are going to say, is the pronoun reflexive or is it intensive? All right. So we need to say if this is an intensive or reflexive pronoun. It says we were fortunate enough to meet the governor himself at the town hall meeting. So we were fortunate enough to meet the governor himself at the town hall meeting. We need to say if that is a reflexive pronoun, himself, or if it's an intensive pronoun. All right, and we can say this is intensive pronoun because he, we himself it intensifies or emphasis on the governor. Because we're saying the governor himself, it refers to the governor. It's like we are putting emphasis on the governor. All right, they say the West African savanna frog is able to conceal itself in ant colonies thanks to chemicals that coat its skin. So we need to say this is intensive pronoun or reflexive pronoun. The West African savanna frog is able to conceal itself in ant colonies thanks to chemicals that coat its skin. So we need to say if itself is a intensive pronoun or if it is a reflexive pronoun. All right. So if itself refers back to the African savanna frog, so we can say that is a reflexive pronoun. Yes, because the savanna frog, we can say it is it, right? Because it refers back to the African savanna frog. All right. The business's success was far greater than what even they themselves had dared to imagine. So their business's success was far greater than what even they themselves had dared to imagine. So we need to say if that is a reflexive pronoun or if it's an intensive pronoun. All right, and if we were to choose the correct one, then we choose option two because themselves refer to they. It's like putting emphasis on they themselves. So that is why we say we intensify it, we emphasize it. All right, you yourself said that education is one of the most important things in life. You yourself, which one is correct? Is it option one, yourself? Is it intensive pronoun or a reflexive pronoun? right? And if we were to choose the correct option, and then we can say that you yourself say that education is one of the most important things in life. So it is an intensive pronoun because we are putting emphasis on you yourself. So it intensifies it, it emphasizes it. All right. We need to say if the which pronoun in bold is reflexive or intensive. The number of people packed into the auditorium surprised everyone, even the musicians themselves. So themselves, is it putting emphasis on the musicians or who else? Or is that a reflexive pronoun or an intensive pronoun? All right, so here we're saying that the number of people packed into the auditorium surprised everyone, even the musicians themselves, right? Which means that themselves, it's putting emphasis on. So it's putting emphasis on the musicians. So we can then say it is an intensive pronoun. All right. The next one says, this is now the last one. It says, my husband and I promised ourselves. So my husband and I promised ourselves that we would always be honest with each other. So my husband and I promised ourselves that we would be honest with each other. So ourselves, is it an intensive pronoun or a reflexive pronoun? My husband and I, it's we. So is ourselves referring to my husband and I, or is it just putting emphasis on the word I? All right, and we can then say ourselves refers back to my husband and I, which is we, right? And that is a reflexive pronoun. All right, so that is the end of our lesson on reflexive and intensive pronouns. We said reflexive pronouns, it basically are pronouns that either end in self or selves. And when it comes to the reflexive pronoun needs to refer back to the subject, whether singular subject or plural subject in which it is, or the phrase it is in. Then we have intensive pronouns, and intensive pronouns either intensifies or emphasize the noun or the pronoun in which it is making mention of. So this is the end of our lesson. Thank you very much, grade 6, for joining the class, and I really hope that you are going to have a good evening further. Goodbye.